Welcome to the Supported Living Services Waiver Exception Review Training for Case Managers. I'm Karina Barrick, my pronouns are she, her, and I'll be hosting this training today. This is a recorded training and will be published and available on the SLS Exceptions website, linked here. My contact information is also listed here, and since we aren't live taking questions, I encourage you to reach out directly to me with any questions or to discuss a specific situation. HCPF's mission is to improve healthcare equity, access, and outcomes for the people we serve while saving Coloradans money on healthcare and driving value for Colorado. These are the topics we'll be discussing today. The goal is for case managers to understand what an SLS exception is, who qualifies, what is the process, and how to complete a review. The Supported Living Services, or SLS exception, was included in the 2021 Long Bill, Senate Bill 21-205. This allows for an increase in flexibilities within the SLS waiver for members who are likely on the DD waitlist. This process allows members to access services above the service plan authorization limit, or SPAL, and/or individual service cap. To access an SLS exception, members must meet specific criteria. A, members must be at risk for an emergency DD waiver enrollment. B, members who have less than 10% of SPAL funding remaining. C, the needed service units are not available because of the current unit limits. Members can meet all three requirements, or only requirements A and B, or only requirements A and C to be eligible. Members must always meet criteria A, which is being at risk for an emergency DD enrollment. The criteria for that emergency DD waiver enrollment are homelessness, abusive or neglectful situation, danger to others, danger to self, loss or incapacitation of the primary caregiver, or the emergency cannot be solved in any other way. Requests cannot be made for the purpose of enhancing quality of life, caregiver support, or if the member requires 24/7 care and needs residential support. There are other options for each of these situations that would need to be pursued in lieu of an SLS exception request. We'll talk more about these later on in the training. This is a broad overview of how to complete the SLS exception process. The case manager will work with a member to determine if unmet needs are best addressed by an SLS exception, a support level review, also known as SLR, or support intensity, also known as SIS, reassessment, would be the best to meet the member's needs. On the SLS exceptions website, there is a waiver options flowchart that can assist in making these decisions with the member and/or guardian. If an SLS exception is the best option to meet unmet needs, the case manager will complete the SLS exception form. Please always use the version on the website to ensure that you're using the most up-to-date form. It is recommended that case managers review this form internally with a supervisor or identified colleague who has experience with this process prior to submitting. The case manager will then submit all required documentation to Telegen and Qualitrack. Required documentation includes a PAR screenshot, if applicable, long-term home health PARs, rights modifications, behavior plans, and similar documentation. Telegen will review and then issue an outcome letter. An outcome can be an approval, partial approval, or denial. Please be aware that SLS exceptions are not subject to notice of actions. If an approval or partial approval is received, the case manager should attach the outcome letter to the PAR in the bridge, which we'll show you how to do shortly. Please submit the PAR and do not leave it as work in progress. This indicates to the system that the PAR is ready for review and approval, and it will be done within 5 to 10 business days.
In this video, we're going to demonstrate how to add an attachment in Bridge. First, we're going to go up to the main menu, and we're going to skip ahead to the PPA search. Then you'll select your member, Once you have your member selected, you will go ahead and select whichever PPA is relevant. And you will scroll down to Attachments, click Add, click Browse. You're going to select the file that you need to attach. Click on the screen. Notice the file name gets added. You can now add a description. I'm navigating out of Attachments and back so you can see how this automatically saves your document. Thank you for watching this short demo on how to add an attachment to Bridge.
We're going to dive into form information. The SLS exception form must be the right option to meet the member's needs. As an example, you're working with a parent who has shared that the member has had a recent change that is resulting in a need for more personal care and massage therapy that exceeds our SPAL. Using the waiver options flowchart, you can identify if a support level review or support intensity scale (SIS) reassessment would be the best option. If the member is needing residential support, another option may be looking into a housing voucher. We'll take a moment to go through this form. We're going to walk through this waiver options flowchart. In the situation you had a parent approach you reporting that a member had an increase in needs that would exceed the SPAL if authorized. So the first question we would ask is, could an increase to services or to overall SPAL help meet the individual's needs? In this situation, it's yes. First question you would ask is there room in the SPAL or number of units of service? The answer was no. Another question you need to consider is this individual eligible for a new SIS reassessment? There's a comment here that says see note number 1. We'll go ahead and scroll down and you'll see here that there are notes on what is a SIS reassessment, what is a support level review, potential other options to explore, and finally an SLS exceptions review request, which we're discussing today. We'll go back up and we'll say no, this member isn't eligible for a SIS reassessment. Does the individual need an overall increase to both SPAL and support level? If the answer was yes, you would pursue a support level review. In our situation, it'll be no. And does the individual meet the exception review process criteria? Which again, as we've already mentioned, the member must be at risk for an emergency DD waiver enrollment. So we'll go back up. If the answer is no, they're not at risk, what would happen is the IDT would meet and explore waivers and other options. Again, some of those will be discussed within this webinar, or they're also listed here under section number 3. We'll scroll back up. If the member does meet the criteria, then you go ahead and proceed with the SLS exception review request. We'll continue with the SLS exception form. The form must be completed in its entirety and cannot be retrodated. Case managers should ensure that unit cost and calculations are correct, describe the service requested clearly and include scope and frequency, provide justification for how these services will prevent an emergency DD request. Remember, the reviewers don't know the member like you do, and providing details will be necessary for an accurate review. This is another area that can be helpful for a supervisor or identified colleague with experience who can help review. Ensuring accuracy prior to form submission can help prevent any unnecessary requests for information or denials. Requests are approved for 1 year or until the next annual review. As reviews are not continuous, case managers can submit new requests anytime during an active SLS exception certification period. Services are provided for what is outlined in the SLS exception letter. For example, if a member receives approval for additional supported community connection or SCC units and later needs to add in hippotherapy, the approved SCC units cannot be reduced to accommodate this service. The exception is granted for specific services justified to meet a need rather than an overall increased SPAL to spend on services. This process should not be used to replace long-term residential supports. For example, if a member is displaced and request is submitted for 6 months of respite, this is not an option for the SLS waiver or exceptions process. Case managers would need to seek support in other areas, including housing options or potentially an emergency DD enrollment request. This process is intended to support the member remaining on the SLS waiver. And finally, SLS exceptions are not to be utilized for a SPAL proration. For example, a member changes waivers in the middle of a certification period, and the utilized services exceed the proration of the SPAL. These situations come directly to the department for review and would not meet the criteria of the exceptions process. Next, we're going to review an example of a completed form. This example will be available in its entirety on the SLS exceptions website. We'll start here by noticing that this section is completed in its entirety. And going through and reviewing the criteria, all the criteria for this process has been met. So we'll continue. Again, we'll note here this section has also been fully completed. If you recall in the waiver flowchart, the option for a member needing an increase to both SPAL and support level would result in pursuing a support level review. In this situation, the case manager said no, so we proceed to the eligibility criteria. As a reminder, all exceptions must meet criteria A, which is at risk for seeking an emergency DD waiver enrollment. An initial review, again, we see that all sections are completed. Let's go ahead and go through this form. The first question is, has an emergency DD waiver enrollment been submitted for this member? No, because at this time, John does not want to pursue the DD waiver as he is happy with his current waiver and the services he receives on this waiver. Next question, what is the risk for seeking emergency DD enrollment? This goes back to the criteria A requirement we've discussed in previous slides. For John, it's danger to self and emergency cannot be resolved any other way. The explanation is John has health needs and behavior needs that require support to ensure his health and safety of himself and those around him. John needs support with communicating his needs, meal preparation, assistance with mobility, and behavioral needs, which are including self-injurious behaviors and elopement. John's parent is his primary caregiver and the only other adult in his home, and he works full-time. In order to ensure John's needs are met while his primary caregiver is unavailable and ensure John has ongoing and regular community access, he requires additional services. Without these supports, John would no longer have his health and safety needs met in his family home and move to the DD waiver. We'll note here that these sections are written with person-centeredness. This is not a request for the provider, guardian, or family member, but it's for John specifically. If you recall, on the first page of this form, we asked if the member was eligible for a SIS reassessment. This section has consistent information, and the answers are no, and the sections are completed and filled out with an NA not applicable. The next section is explain what has changed for the member that an increase in services or funds are needed. This last year, John's primary caregiver, parent, has started working full-time instead of part-time to provide additional financial support for the family. Previously, John and his parent would spend days together going to lunch, going for a walk, and visiting friends. Since John's parent has increased their time at work, this has resulted in John having an additional 2 days a week where his parent is unavailable to provide support with communication, mobility support, meal preparation, and community access. John's sibling was coming to provide the gap support needed. However, that sibling will be moving out of state in a month. To ensure that John's needs are met, he requires additional supports. So far, the purpose of this request isn't so John's parents can supplement income. His parent will still continue to be a natural support, and John's needs still need to be met. The next section is explain the current living situation and natural supports. John currently lives with his parent, who is his primary caregiver in their family home. John's parent is his natural support in many areas at home and is his paid family caregiver for personal care services. His sibling, who he is close with and has been an ongoing natural support and is not a paid family caregiver. However, his sibling will be moving out of state in a month. There are no additional family members or natural supports. As a reminder, natural supports can also include neighbors, teachers, or friends. Next is identify state plan benefits. John currently attends physical therapy or PT once a week to improve balance and support mobility needs. Think about members who have some sort of state plan benefit. This could be long-term home health, speech therapy, occupational therapy, state plan counseling. All of these should be included in this section if applicable. This next section is explain previous interventions attempted prior to seeking SLS exception review funds to address members' increase in needs. John's sibling has been acting as a natural support in his life to address the following needs: communication, mobility support, meal preparation, and community access. John requires support with verbalizing his preferences, and his brother has been a great support in this area as he encourages John to identify his wants and needs verbally or through physical identification. When John experiences frustration, primarily due to not being understood, he will bite his arm and/or leave a situation by eloping, which can be a health and safety concern as John requires mobility support and is considered a fall risk. This behavior has been supported through proactive interventions from his primary caregiver. Until now, behavior services have not been requested as John is currently utilizing his full SLS budget. State plan counseling was active for a period of time, however, did not address the behavioral need and was ended. The next section, explain plans for services and/or funding if approved. If approved, John will be able to attend day service for an additional 2 days a week. John has a positive relationship with his day program provider at a program he has been with for 2 years. John enjoys community access, and his day program ensures that his mobility, communication, and behavioral needs are well supported. This would ensure that John receives a proper support during the days of the week that his primary caregiver is at work. If approved, John will be able to participate in behavioral counseling services 1 day a week. This would allow him to work with a behaviorist on elopement and self-injurious behavior specifically. We'll note here that additional services are based on unmet needs that align with the service definition. While John may potentially like to try music therapy, it isn't aligned with SLS exception requests. The next section is this a temporary need, 1 year or less, or will this be a long-term need, greater than 1 year? The addition of day services will be a long-term need. The addition of behavior supports may be a temporary need depending on behavioral supports implemented and if these can be maintained without ongoing counseling. John would like to remain in his family home and continue to have his needs met on the SLS waiver. He is on the waitlist for the DD waiver, and in the future, if offered, he will consider it at that time. However, there is no definitive timeline on when that will happen. This next section is additional information. John does not require an increased level of care, which is why an SLR was not pursued. Instead, he requires some additional services to ensure his needs are met and can continue to be successful on his current waiver. Currently, his SPAL allows personal care services, 2 days a week of supported community connection services or SCC, respite, and massage services. His parent provides many natural supports outside of personal care to ensure that John's needs are met and will continue to do so with the addition of these services. Any additional information can be captured here that you as the case manager feel is relevant and helpful. As a reminder, the reviewers don't know John like you do, so the case manager included some additional information here. On this next section, we see the current PAR information. Notice line number 3, which is the total dollar increase requested. The purpose of these requests aren't to increase funding exponentially. It's to ensure a member has their needs met on the SLS waiver they're on and maybe prevent an emergency DD enrollment. Requests that have large small increases are subjected to department review, which may include additional requests for information. This is where we start getting into the breakdown of the services requested. First, I'll notice here the requested start date is for a future date. The breakdown is what is the service, what units are currently authorized, what is the current service authorization depletion date, how many units are you requesting, and the cost calculation. Always use the current rate and fee schedule to determine the cost of the service. The breakdown is the unit cost multiplied by the number of units requested. This section is continuing a breakdown for services for John. He's in need of behavior assessment services and behavior counseling services. I'd like to share here that all services requested must still meet the service definition. So for example, behavior assessments, according to regulation, may only be completed once in a certification period. If John had already had the service authorized and utilized, he could not get another assessment completed in the same certification period, as this would not align with regulatory guidelines. This slide wraps up the SLS exception example. Again, this example in its entirety is posted on the HCBS SLS exceptions website. This slide has resources for case managers. First, you'll notice the Colorado Code of Regulations, which has service definitions for each services, which might be a helpful reference as you're requesting services. It also has regulations for the SLS exceptions process specifically. Next is the Utilization Review Utilization Management, or URUM website. This has process flows for how to use Telligent's Qualitrack system and working with Telligent on SLS exceptions. And again, the SLS exceptions website, which will have your most up-to-date form, trainings, and decision flow charts. Contact information, I'm here for any SLS exception questions or needs. Please do not hesitate to email me. General questions about services or a situation, you can email to our general HCBS questions inbox. Thank you so much for completing this training.